Hey everybody, it has been a minute. I've been super busy, but today we're going to make the Seersucker Sundress, and we start out with the first few steps of the bound buttonholes. So we'll go on to finish them later after we've folded in the front part of the bodice to become the facing. And I'm just doing kind of a really fast overview of how I do these. But if you're interested, I am going to be publishing a more in-depth video about bound buttonholes. And so if they're a little scary for you, then just stay tuned, because some more help is on the way. They're really not too bad. You just gotta take your time, like any sewing project. Just gotta take your time and don't get frustrated. Yeah, and press. That's a key. But yeah, you can change any buttonhole project to be bound buttonholes as long as you have a facing or a lining. And they're a little fiddly and a little annoying, and especially with this seersucker, it was pretty loosely woven, so I was kind of concerned about having to unpick. But they all turned out fine. So after we've done the bound buttonholes, then we move on to the gathering portion of the bodice, and this pattern's a little nuts. I'm not gonna lie. There's all these kind of slices out of these pieces where one of the sides is longer and you gather that to fit the shorter side. So that's what you see with all those marker linings and all that. So you gotta gather, and then you actually have to slice a little farther in. And then once you've gathered to fit, then you sew that down, like so. So because that seam didn't have a lining encasing it, the only way I could finish it was by pinking. So I did that, and then I just top stitched that down. And this is what the back of the bound buttonholes look like after they've been pinked. So I serged, and then that is the front part of the bodice that folds over to become the facing for the bound buttonholes. And at this point, I've reached the part in the project where you just sew in your bra. So this is the neckline, I guess, facing piece. And you cut it on the bias, and then you pin it all the way around after you've pressed it according to the instructions. And then you sew that, and then this part was a little tricky. It was pretty fiddly. There was kind of a lot of fabric, but I just kept my patience, and you can see there I was really having a tricky time trying to fold it. But eventually I got it, and then you hand stitch. This project actually had a lot of hand stitching involved, which I'm fine with. I like hand stitching. I think it's kind of meditative and it's nice. It's just relaxing for me. But finally I finished that, and then it's on to the sleeves. So these are actually sleeve cuffs. So you got sleeve cuffs, and then you have another facing piece for the sleeves in addition to this. You don't have to do that piece. You don't have to do this facing part, but I was very pleased with how it turned out. It was just so nice on the inside. And it's just a nice kind of vintage, couture sort of finish. So I definitely recommend that. So they have you press that facing piece and then trim it. So as you can see, I've sewn on the cuff, and now I'm going to sew on that sleeve facing. And every time I do another step, especially one kind of like that, I just go back and make sure that I'm not sewing anything on the wrong way or upside down, etc. But once you sew that on, then you trim the seam allowance, and then you fold the facing over that, and then you hand sew that down. And now it's time to move on to the skirt. So I have serged all of those raw edges as marked. And then you sew those serged edges together. So the front and the back pieces, and then the back seam. And so then you're left with these big kind of triangular smile-shaped holes in your skirt. So you do 2 lines of stitching, 2 or 3 lines. I like to do 3. And then you gather to fit. See? Like that. And then once you've done that, then you sew up the front seam. So after that, I stitched the bodice to the skirt, and then I serged that raw edge. And then I inserted the zipper facing piece, and I went about my merry way to install my zipper. So unfortunately, the first attempt was a failure because I stretched my fabric. So don't do that. I did it again and it worked that time. So this is the second portion of the bound buttonhole process. You clip where the buttonholes are, and then you fold those little teeny tiny seam allowances inward and hand stitch the facing to the bodice. And as you can see, I created my own covered buttons. I really love the look of self-covered buttons. I think they just look so nice. Then I marked where to stitch them, and then I hand stitched them. So then you take the cup and you fold it in half upwards, and then you have to tack that down. And I created a narrow hem by first serging and then folding up and sewing that down. And now, ready for the reveal. Ta-da! So I think this is the perfect sundress. It's light and it's airy. I love it, and I love the fit. I did actually alter the bust portion. That gathered line came up way too high, so I moved it down about 1 inch, and it was perfect. So make sure you do a muslin before you actually make this dress, but highly recommend it. I love the hand sewn portions of it. It just gives such a great couture finish. Thank you so much for watching, as always, and you can follow me on Instagram for more content at Liz Von Villas. Just break out your Instagram app and scan this screen right now, and I hope to see you again next time. Bye!